Hey everyone, this is Kate McCullough. I am the co-founder of New.io, and you're here with us on the RevOps Review podcast. And I have today my co-founder Tina Kung, our CTO, and she is a veteran from Zora and Salesforce CPQ, Oracle CPQ, all the CPQs and billing platforms. And I also have Max Maeder, who is the founder of FoundHQ, which is a hiring platform that matches companies with experts from the GTM space and systems and RevOps. So, Max, do you want to add some color to that on your intro?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to this conversation with both of you. So a little more kind of color into the world I'm coming out of. I've basically been living go-to-market systems and RevOps for the better part of the last decade. Started in consulting, found my way moving into sort of talent acquisition and resourcing strategy. And then about 4 years ago, launched FoundHQ, which has had an evolution, over those last 4 years, which I think gives us sort of unique perspective and just insights on the market. We really started as a pure play, essentially freelancers marketplace, niched down to only focus on Salesforce. So how do we remove all the friction to connect companies with, a network of pre-vetted Salesforce freelancers that has since, evolved into both hiring platform as well as sort of advisory around resourcing strategy. How should we structure and scale, systems teams, ops teams, et cetera. And has also expanded into sort of executive search and then helping companies actually, staff up those teams. So it gives us good sort of perspective on the ground of things companies are struggling with, how these decisions are getting made, and ultimately what effective and potentially ineffective solutions to those problems look like. So looking forward to getting into all of that and more.
Awesome. You do nothing, clearly.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about today, super excited, is Salesforce's importance as infrastructure. And you're all like, okay, what does that mean? Well, we're going to break it down. And when we talk about it is what is the impact not just to your sales team, but other parts of the business, ops, CS, finance, even product and engineering. Why does it matter to you? And why is it not just a CRM? So we're going to walk through this today and go through a bunch of different questions and really think through how you can actually make Salesforce work for you against your business objectives more than you thought possible. And we care about this. New is native to Salesforce. We have a robust platform that does massive calculations outside of Salesforce or writes directly to its objects. And that's a huge amount of our passion is actually for Salesforce as a platform and usability for sales reps. But it extends way more than that. It's post-sales, it's product teams, it's everyone. So we're going to dive into this today. But I'm going to take a step back before we jump in and talk about one fundamental thing about the internal culture around internal tools. So, Max, I'm kind of curious, your perspective is, what is the culture around like tooling internally? And what do you see in the Salesforce ecosystem? You have a vast amount of use cases for the different companies you work with.
Yeah, I think this topic is something we write about a lot, talk about a lot, because, our customer base really sits at both ends of the spectrum, right? So we work with very early stage startups who have a small or non-existent RevOps and systems, team in place. And then we work with Fortune 500s that have, hundreds within each of those teams. And then that sort of middle bucket is where you start to see the paths kind of diverge in terms of how they plan on investing and scaling these disciplines. And I think it really does come down to a pretty critical stage during, early stage growth, particularly in SaaS, where, you look at any startup, Series A, Series B even, the team is spread thin, right? You don't yet have all of the headcount you can use. This often means functions that will eventually be larger teams, like the internal tools team, need a place to live when it's just a few people. And it might not be the permanent place that reporting structure actually lives. So typically for internal tools and go-to-market systems, specifically, it falls under the purview of RevOps. And when the needs are relatively simple. I think that structure can work fine. Without proper systems leadership, I think internal tools can fall into a routine where they operate in a more reactive capacity, right? Problems arise and they're basically told to go solve that problem. And they do, and they can do that effectively. While that's okay in the beginning, I think companies need to eventually develop a more sophisticated internal tool strategy and an actual product roadmap so that they can meet, whatever complex needs the business will have, but do so by getting out in front of them so that they don't become prohibitive and blockers. And what can happen, from what I've seen countless times, is that the wrong perception of what that internal tools team does can take root. So in those early stages, when the group is more reactive, they're viewed as admins or as a help desk responding to tickets, and they're not really viewed as a center of internal product innovation, because that's not really the scale and scope of the fixes and solutions that they're delivering. But then an organizational culture can sort of form around that perception. And at that point, I think it becomes really difficult to shift how the value of the internal tools function is viewed, which then impedes investment in it and therefore the capacity of what they're eventually able to deliver. And so it sort of can become self-fulfilling in that regard. I mean, I think in the context of this, like, perception really is reality. And so I think Salesforce, as soon as possible, needs to be in the hands of a team that can shape the perception of its value, can evangelize the function, can market features internally, and really drive innovation around the tool. And a lot of that does come down to, how it's positioned, viewed, perceived internally. And because, again, in those early stages, when it is a little bit more of a just tactical, reactive, build things on the fly type of discipline, if that takes hold and sticks, it's difficult to sort of reposition it for what it could be, and the ways that you can extract sort of maximum value from internal tool spend and go-to-market system spend.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the interesting thing about Salesforce is it's not just a CRM, and there's a lot more in there. And I think startups in the reactive phase just scratch the surface of it. They're using the basic capabilities of it. I'm curious, it's just a follow-up question, because I want to get Tina's opinion on that. Like, what do you think the inflection point, Max, is of getting from that reactive to proactive phase? Is there like a revenue point or a company size point?
Of when it should happen or of when it commonly happens?
I would love to hear the answer to both, actually, is when you think it should, and then what you see commonly happening.
Yeah, so I think obviously it's a little contextual, right? But I think a very good sort of baseline to have in mind is, we can sort of get to how an internal tools team should ultimately be structured and functioning at scale, and how to sort of centralize all of internal tools around it. I think in order to have a sophisticated, product innovation viewed internal tools team, you need to start centralizing it really at the moment when more than one business unit have dedicated system specialists embedded within them, right? So the moment that you go from 3 people on go-to-market systems to those go-to-market systems people and a NetSuite administrator and a Marketo administrator, you can't have Marketo managed by marketing, go-to-market systems managed by RevOps, NetSuite managed by finance. At that point, you need to immediately make a transition where that headcount is all centralized under a singular leader and visionary of internal tools as a whole, rather than disparate groups that are sort of owned, managed, and strategized by individual business units.
Tina, you worked for Salesforce, so I'm curious what your perspective on is just really this, like, what is internal tools? What is Salesforce? I mean, what Max is saying.
Yeah, I really want to add color to the product innovation side, right? So building products for internal teams also really require the designers, the builders to look at the problems from, more of a product innovation mindset. So I worked at Salesforce before, but Actually, my first interaction with Salesforce was back in 2009 when I became an ISV when I was a CA. So we were collaborating with Salesforce to build a project management product using the Salesforce platform. It's not a CRM tool, right? So I've always seen Salesforce as a PaaS. It's a platform as a service from day one. In addition to that, it's a great CRM SaaS. So what I found out was that it allows you to build products from a business perspective. So you focus on your business requirements, your objects, processes, personas, integrations, data management, and so on. So that aligns super well with the product's mindset, right? So what are the problems, business problems we're trying to solve? Focus on why and what, not how, right? That helps you build the product vision. Then you will naturally find the best way to solve the problem. I've been, doing core engineering for my entire career, typically on SQL, Java, AWS stack. But with that mindset, even knowing that Salesforce is not my typical engineering stack, I discovered a lot of platform capabilities over time that allow my team to develop and ship products with high quality and also velocity. And even better, right, they actually meet the business needs of customers. So that's the color I want to add in terms of seeing Salesforce, not just a CRM tool, but also a platform as a service for applications that allows you to quickly build products for internal teams that use all the really excellent tools and ecosystem to meet the requirements of the customers.
I think that's really interesting is that I think there's this narrow perception of Salesforce, even though they have this massive ecosystem, is like, oh, as a startup, I want to just stay on HubSpot because it's easy. HubSpot is a CRM. Salesforce is a definitive platform. And I think that what you're getting at is really, really important because, we had this whole explosion of SaaS, right? And everybody's like, point solution, point solution, point solution. But as you grow, that becomes a nightmare of data integration, a nightmare of where is your customer data? Is it this, that, or the other? And I think that Salesforce still aligns well with the vision of a cohesive customer journey, a vision of a cohesive business strategy without having to maintain many, many tools. And it also gives you that flexibility of saying, oh, I can build something on it, which is what you're saying. So if I take a step back, Max, you're saying, hey, you need to have a consolidated vision. Tina, you're like, hey, you need to have a consolidated vision with a product owner that actually maximizes out that it's much bigger than a CRM. And there's more to it than the CRM. And I think that's interesting because that's a common misperception, I think, is for startups is they want to keep everything kind of simple, stupid because they don't have a lot of headcount. And I think Salesforce can be daunting in that phase. But oftentimes when I'm talking to companies, I'm like, just start with Salesforce and build from there because that's where you're going to end up anyways. Because you need that configurability and you want to be able to build internal tools for your teams and have a platform that can do that for you. And other tools just can't. They're not a platform that does that. So I guess that leads into the next part. And I'm excited for this because, when I was in the hypergrowth phase of Anaplan, we were just constantly pulling tools. Each team would just grab tools. And then that had to be reconciled later. And it was really, really painful. But having a holistic vision early matters so much. And it actually reduces so much pain and allows your growth to not be so bumpy. So what is possible with Salesforce? Like, what can you do with it? And Tina, you start on this one. What are the top things that you like about Salesforce as a ops tool chest?
Yeah, one thing that I don't know whether a lot of people know about is that Salesforce is just great data hub for customers, right? So a lot of people are saying, oh, Salesforce is not great at reporting. At least it's not default reporting system if you don't use Tableau. However, it's an amazing database for storing your mission critical customer data, right? Salesforce, like you just said, has a massive ecosystem of tools. Right, you can find all the major data integration, data pipelining tools in the market supporting Salesforce out of the box, right? So you can create, rules and flows to do, data accuracy validation and data transformation. You can embed charts and reports in every single landing page that you build in Salesforce, so that it helps helps your users to make data-driven decisions. You can easily access data using like SQL libraries or REST APIs. You can create and consume platform events for asynchronous data integration, such as provisioning, fulfillment using your third-party ERP systems. You can achieve all of these with no code in Salesforce, right? Especially in today's era with generative AI, right? Coding is no longer as critical path as before when it comes to building, business systems. So again, all these great tools in the ecosystem can really help you create this data hub in Salesforce, and then you can easily pump the data into a data warehouse for for extensive reporting, analysis, do machine learning, and all that. So this is the first thing, I can think of when you're talking about Salesforce. Is not just the CRM tool. It's a data hub for customers, for customer data.
I'm curious, Max, do you have any anecdotes of people that haven't used it that way and should? Like of companies that have just ignored its power there?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are probably the less interesting anecdotes than the ones of look at how this organization is leveraging it to the fullest. Because really, the companies that are underutilizing the potential of Salesforce are just, it's just what you said at the top. They've got a very narrow view of what it is and what it can do. And so you end up with, Salesforce as just a CRM, or Salesforce just for, your support teams. And I think, to be fair, I think if there was one criticism around Salesforce, a business and platform that our entire organization revolves around, it's that they could give a little love to, front end design, to usability. I think at the user level, I will fully give that category to a HubSpot or to lighter weight platforms. Fair enough. But I think if you're underutilizing it, that's where you then hear users with so much frustration around having to use Salesforce, because it's sort of this, hey, the tool's not doing a whole lot for me, and it's a little bit more difficult for me to use. Why don't we just use HubSpot? And the reality is, because you're not actually building out the full capabilities from a workflow automation perspective and otherwise, in terms of, more sophisticated data integration and everything you can do to sort of tie systems together. So, I think the underutilization of it really just kind of stems from that narrow view. But I think if you zoom out and you look at Salesforce and what their growth trajectory has looked like, I think one argument that you hear a lot that sort of frustrates me, because it flies in the face of the point, that we're making in this conversation, is that they can be criticized for their growth strategy relying on acquisitions, right? Which you saw with CPQ, multiple to eventually land on Marketing Cloud, Tableau, MuleSoft. But the fundamental reason why it was so brilliant is because the sole objective in scaling Salesforce and making those acquisitions was to build a true 360-degree view of the customer. And you could never do it as fast as they did if you're planning on building all of that organically, right? And so I think when they draw comparisons to an Oracle in this way, where people sort of say Salesforce might be overtaking because they're getting a little bit slower, growth is slowing. I think there's no comparison there, right? The Oracle growth trajectory was they got sleepy and started making acquisitions simply to boost, the bottom line, similar to how private equity firms go shopping for value. Salesforce's acquisitions were all additive to the core underlying value prop of the product, which does come down to that 360-degree view of the customer. And so I think the ecosystem they've been able to put together, that was the sole goal in mind, which you can't deny, their execution on.
Yeah, that's still the case. It's a highly configurable database with a usability layer on top, and still really, really impressive and really configurable. And I think that's what scares people, but is also the benefit. And I think that you're tying into something, Max, is that we're here talking about the core platform. You can definitely say that some of those acquisitions don't perform as well. They're not that well integrated into it. So we're not, clearly we are native onto Salesforce and CPQ as well as billing. So we're looking at Salesforce core here in this conversation, which is a really good clarifying part. And in that, I think that, when you're early in a startup, you don't want a lot of configurability because you don't have someone to manage it. But later on, you want that configurability. You want that experience to reflect your unique business model. And you can't get that out of a vanilla low-end CRM. You need the dynamic nature of a very, very well thought through database, which is what Salesforce is. And so that's what we get excited about. And they have APIs and they have pipeline tools and they have data integration tools. And that's really the heart of it. But I think that, per your point, Max, if you configure it right, if you do the work and you align it to your business objectives, then it becomes an awesome seller ops tool. It's a benefit. It's incredibly lethal on that if you do it right. And I think that, Tina, I would love to hear from your engineering perspective. You're a unique engineer, is that you see from an engineering perspective the value of the platform to accelerate engineering teams. I'm curious how you see that.
Yeah, So when it comes to like building an internal tools, right? Engineering leads, what I've seen is that they really push back on Salesforce, right? Because like I mentioned earlier, Salesforce is not your typical dev stack. It's not Java, SQL, deployed on AWS, Google Clouds, right? It doesn't have it may not have super easy to use APIs. It doesn't have webhooks, but again, right? The key success factors, right, for products and engineering leads is to really focus on solving the business problems, right? That's what I learned in my entire career, is that you want to use the best tool that fits in the business world, right? What kind of business problem you're trying to solve. Salesforce provides low-code, no-code application platform as a service, and you can easily achieve the business goals with the minimal amount of coding. And going back to this is the era of AI, right? Coding is no longer as important as before in building business systems. So it really helps you to level up to see what is the business systems, the vision I'm trying to achieve. So my advice for engineering and product leads is always don't marry to the technical stack. Focus on solving the real business problems, and then figure out the why and what before you get to the how. And then you can be in the discovery mode and realize that, hey, there's no webhooks, but there are business, platform events that can do, just that can actually be as powerful as webhooks, right? So there are all these kind of, design choices you can have with Salesforce as a platform.
Yeah. And I'm going to add some color on that. What we're talking about here is saying that, yes, you have your customer data, but where does the transaction against that customer data occur? So you might have, their contact information, their company information. But oftentimes what Tina's talking about is product and eng teams are like, cool, I'm going to build a product-led growth motion product. It's going to sit over in a corner and it's going to be separate from my direct sales team that have the customer data over here. And they don't meet. So you have no single source of truth that, hey, customer A came in, they self-served themselves. And then, this other customer is a direct sales customer, because they're really literally in different databases. So there's a lot of possibility of centralizing all your customers into a system so you have a full view, and saying that there's a marriage of a transactional layer on top of the customer layer. And I think that that's really important. And it's not just important for finance, it's important for customer success or post-sales. You need to have visibility against the customer information into what the transaction was that you originally sold them and how you're going to upsell them. And then for finance, if they own Deal Desk, which is often the case, the transaction starts in Salesforce, potentially. That booking, or even the order form starts in Salesforce. And so everyone can coalesce around Salesforce as a hub. It's just a really interesting dynamic that I think we're coming out of an age where you have the luxury of picking your own tools in silos. The customer lifecycle is so integrated now, so diverse. And you have to be, again, AI, you have to be able to really analyze that data. You need to centralize your data so that you can start doing experimentation on it and seeing opportunities. If you've got tool in all sorts of different places and you're not actually centralized, you're missing an opportunity. So finance teams can get in on this, post-sales, product and eng, the sales team. So in effect, what we're saying here is Salesforce is not, it's not just a CRM, it's a platform you actually can drive business off of. And so I'm curious from Max, what are some really good examples of companies that you've seen doing this successfully or really, really leveraging the most out of Salesforce?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one example that definitely comes to mind, and, we sort of, when we reference it, half jokingly say that, Ticketmaster, the large, event management, concert ticketing platform, is essentially the Ticketmaster product is basically just an interface built entirely on top of Salesforce, right? The Ticketmaster business itself is essentially Salesforce as the infrastructure. And I think this, despite being primarily like a B2C use case, they've got some venue, management stuff that they deal with as a business. Primarily it's B2C, but I think it's just such an excellent example of the scale in which Salesforce can cover, just the sheer surface area within the business. That when you look at the ecosystem of products that Ticketmaster has stitched together, they run all customer acquisition and, ongoing nurturing through Marketing Cloud. They run all support through Service Cloud, powered by, AI and ML, in-app capabilities. They have, ticket agent and like custom fan applications to manage, inventory, prior purchases, whatever else through custom, applications built on top of the Salesforce platform. They manage, quote to pay processing all through Salesforce, right? So you look at a business like that, you go to the Ticketmaster website and you say, okay, great. Like this is the product. I'm interacting with the core product. You're really not. You're really just touching the front end, and all of the complexity and the processing and the transactions and the real brain behind everything that needs to happen, it's all going through Salesforce. When you look at that reality, and then you think about the fact that Ticketmaster as a whole has something like 700 or 750 product engineers, and their entire full-time internal Salesforce team is about 50 people. You begin to say, well, there must be something to actually building on Salesforce, right? Where you're essentially, 80% of the way there? Let's say it's, 60% of the way there in terms of like out of the box, great, I've got Marketing Cloud. Now I need to, configure it, customize it. You need to deal with integrations and data flow, fine. But you're starting on second base instead of having to build, completely from scratch, which Tina could obviously speak to, better than I could. But I think that just demonstrates not only how much is possible on the platform in terms of its surface area, but also, the efficiency gains that you get building on something where, the Salesforce infrastructure already exists. You're then just layering, complex changes on top to make it work for you. And I think there's, dozens of other use cases where companies are just doing interesting things that I think speak to the innovation of Salesforce. Like Activision is a good one, the, game development company. Again, consumer-oriented play, but I just think that these examples really kind of highlight the scale that it can deal with. And this one's pretty simple. Like they use Marketing Cloud plus Service Cloud to basically turn on what they call swarming, within customer support. So they leverage Marketing Cloud for social listening and social engagement to proactively identify like customer issues, customer complaints, or bugs that are being talked about within Activision or within individual games. And then those, automatically get routed with it, internally to customer support teams, not only for potentially kicking something over to the product team to resolve the issue, but also kicking that back over, to the direct customer interaction so that you can manage customer experience while you're managing the actual core product improvements. And so something like that, like you're then also reducing inbound ticket volume. Like you're basically solving tickets without a ticket being created simply because you've switched on something like, social listening on Twitter or wherever else using Marketing Cloud, and then brought those insights into Salesforce and distributed them to the various teams that, are required to handle different elements of the problem and work towards resolution.
Below that, it's like saying this is a core hub and you can bring everything from social, including your own product, and everything else closer to your internal view. So it becomes really that like master control of your internal view of the customer and all of the different ways that you interact with it. And I know, if you start building custom code over here, let's say you build a custom billing solution, we frequently see that. That means that you just created a great chasm between your customer data and then the transactions. So then your sales and post-sales team has no view of what's happening from a transactional standpoint. They only have the customer data and their hands are tied. But Tina, like, I would love to hear from your perspective, from an engineering perspective, like the advantages that you see, like dovetailing onto what Max is saying.
Yeah, so what I want to add on is that from engineering products perspective, right? So, I just really want to, again, focus on what the product vision, what problem you're trying to solve, and leverage the best breed, available in the ecosystem, right? Because what I love about Salesforce is its massive ecosystem. There are lots of applications on the AppExchange, right? Those apps are built with expertise, have building expertise, right? So you don't have to worry about like, am I following the best practices? Am I, do I have the best design, follow the best design principles and all that. And then what you do is to really understand what they can bring to your product roadmap, to your vision. And then you can, create flows, create customizations, configurations to really make these apps work for your system, right? And so that you can not only have like minimum, investment in like using engineering resources, you can also guarantee that your system will be able to scale when your business scale, because you're leveraging the best breed of all the apps in the ecosystem, right? That's what I like to add. And oftentimes, business owners or product owners think, hey, I have this great vision and, I can use APIs or, all these like, cloud infrastructure to build everything from scratch. But think again, right? How much engineering resources are you willing to invest and how long it's going to take? And then also, is your system going to scale when your business scale? Are you having the best breed or best, following the best design principles? All these are great considerations before you start.
Yeah. I mean, the breadth is crazy. I think it really ties all of your teams together at some extent if you do it right, if you think of it in that overarching way. And I think that like taking a step back, you could use it for sales, CS, marketing, finance has a hand in it. May not be a core finance function, but it can flow right into your finance function. So I'm like, as a listener, you're probably like, well, how do I make all of this possible? I have X amount of resources. How do I start? How do I think? And I'd be curious, Matt, how do you advise companies to start seeing Salesforce as way more than a CRM and then secondarily as a product that you manage holistically?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it really starts with having that centralized systems leadership in place, right? So that you have a holistic view of internal tooling needs across the entire organization rather than kind of very narrow siloed views that an individual business unit may have identified within their specific team or work stream. So I think it starts with a, centralized sort of ownership model. And then, I think within that, obviously the specific size, composition, resourcing of that team is highly dependent on what you're currently using, what, initiatives you may have. But I do tend to think that there are a couple roles that are absolutely critical to that internal tools or internal Salesforce team having a chance at being a center of product innovation. And there are two roles that are most frequently missing, even from teams that are 50 plus people. And they really are, they go by different titles, but it's most commonly the business analyst and then the product manager or product owner role. You see companies either missing these at a large scale or companies, dramatically under-resourced in these areas and very much like over-resourced in admins, engineers. Like if you see an org chart and it's, 10 admins, 10 Salesforce engineers, 1 BSA and 2 product managers, what you can pretty much determine immediately is that is a business that is entirely reactive because all of their capacity is going towards delivery resources that can actually execute on the work that's landing on their plate, but they lack the resources needed to, proactively plan a roadmap for an individual business unit and collaborate, as a systems team and then sort of push that strategy out to the business. And I think something, Tina had mentioned earlier on that is so important to understand just as a dynamic is the way in which problems are solved with traditional product and engineering teams versus internal tools teams is fundamentally different, right? Product and eng teams are so user-centered in their approach, right? Like they have product designers. Any company, B2B, B2C, whatever you're building, you have product designers. And that is, considered to be like a user-centric discipline. You probably also have user researchers whose job is exclusively to go out and conduct extensive research, both qualitative and quantitative, and use all of those insights to inform on what exactly you're going to build as a product team. Very few insights or features should come from the top down, should come from product leadership. They should all be bottom up feedback, behavioral insights, usability, testing, and data that is then synthesized back within the team, and that is used to kind of formulate the product roadmap. Salesforce teams and internal tools teams don't function that way. I mean, almost never. The best ones do, and more need to function in that way because otherwise, again, you've got business teams who know they have a problem and they're, essentially coming up with the proposed solution to some degree and the prioritization of that proposed solution over other priorities that could have a greater impact to that team or to that business. And so there's, when it comes to transforming into that kind of product innovation group, I think it does really come down to resourcing strategy and structure and whether you have the right people in the right roles and whether the dynamics are set up, between the internal tools team, the stakeholders and users they support, and there's a healthy kind of push and pull in terms of where strategy originates and who ultimately makes the decisions on what's getting built and how it's getting built.
Yeah. And I think I love that. And I think bringing it back to customer centricity really is that I think there's a tendency to be like, the product and eng team are really looking at the customer and that customer journey, right? We all know that, they come in, they buy, they expand, they get built. This whole journey happens. But it seems like, oddly enough, that the baton pass that has to happen to support that, from marketing to sales to customer success to finance, and then back again if you expand them, is an afterthought. But that's the undergirding of the customer experience. And, I think a lot of engineering teams are more of in a product-led growth motion where they've been separate from a direct sales or separate from the rest of the business, but you can't have one with the other. If you have a customer journey that's up here and you don't have the internal systems aligned to that customer journey, it's going to fall down and it's actually really going to impact the customer entirely. It's going to be a negative experience for them. They'll feel like they're hop skipping and jumping between systems because they literally are from an internal system standpoint. Like if you use a different CS tool compared to the marketing tool, everything feels and looks really different from a customer standpoint. If the CS team doesn't get the right data from the sales team, then they have a bumpy onboarding experience. And it's just a really interesting thing to say. If you have a product vision, you need to have a complementary internal systems vision that aligns to the voice of the customer. And I don't know, I think the industry is getting there on that. But that's the thing that I think that you can start early on, and Salesforce should not be daunting in saying that, that ops function, everyone being on the RevOps team, that's what I like to say. It's a squad function. It's a cross-departmental squad function, starting in marketing and all the way to finance and back again. And you all should care that you have a handshake between tools, because the impact is customer and then the impact is revenue. So, Tina, I know that I'm passionate about this and you are too. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'm really passionate about the stress, especially when you're saying that, it starts from sales, but, goes through like RevOps, customer success, and finance. I also want to really chime in on the role finance team play in this, the Salesforce as the center of ecosystem of business tools, right? And I think this really goes back to Salesforce as a great CRM system. When you look at the CRM system, if you look at revenue lifecycle of customers, right? It starts from opportunity pipeline, goes through quoting, ordering, usage rating, billing, provisioning, and ends at revenue recognition. Right. So finance team really, even though Salesforce is not a finance system, finance team really needs to be engaged throughout the entire revenue lifecycle instead of being left aside. Right. So that you don't go back and forth between your sales and finance to say, hey, is my invoice correct? How do I calculate my ARRs and sales missions? How do I, adjust and correct the revenue recognition rules and all that, right? So as designers and also admins of your internal business, systems, you don't want to, just have a large team that maintain tons of systems stitching together and use your engineering resources to really, stitch the system together for both configuration data and data, right? It's entirely possible just to, for example, review your invoice data when your quote is ready, or see how revenue is recognized directly in Salesforce when your opportunities close won. It is entirely possible, even though Salesforce is not your typical finance platform, but you can still drive revenue clarity, right? Even predict revenue with finance team throughout the entire revenue journey of the customers if you actually architect the system in the proper way. So I think that's really important for, a lot of, finance teams, who also tend to push back that Salesforce is not my finance system, but Salesforce actually helps the finance team to be engaged throughout the entire revenue journey.
Yeah. And finance is increasingly owning deal desks, so they do need to have a leg in there. And it's interesting because Ticketmaster is such a contrary example, because that's an entire product-led growth motion off of Salesforce. So that's like a consolidation of motions. It's super, super cool. So taking another step back, and this is one of my favorite questions because it's been the great debate over the last couple of years, is what's the future of ownership around this? And this kind of includes the future of RevOps as a term. And it's been this shifty, nebulous term. I think, Clary came out and it's like everyone had this feeling that RevOps was sales and marketing. And then other people look at it and they're like, well, BizOps is sales and finance. And I think what I'm seeing in the market, which is really interesting, is that RevOps is a unifying function across all. But then in bigger companies, you see it more in smaller companies. And I think the strongest RevOps people have a foot in finance. And they're looking at all of this tooling across the customer journey and saying, how does this unify? And you're seeing VPs of RevOps appear. But, who should, as companies are growing, who owns this end-to-end product? I'm curious, Max, what's your take on it? Because I like the idea of a C-suite RevOps person. I think that might be the future. But honestly, it doesn't really matter who their name is probably. It's just do they own it? But I'm curious what you're seeing trend-wise and who you think should own this.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the future of like internal tools ownership goes hand in hand with the future of the RevOps function, given that, particularly with startups, like RevOps is going to own internal tools. And I think when you look at the evolution of revenue operations, I mean, the crazy thing is that revenue operations wasn't even a thing 5 or 6 years ago, right? It was sales operations. And when I was running my last search firm, 2014 to 2018, somewhere towards the middle of that was really the first time that we saw startups hiring sales ops at like a director and VP level. So sales ops, it existed if you're a Workday or a massive enterprise with, scale and complexity and all the other things. But a startup with 30 to 40 reps wasn't really hiring a VP of sales ops. It was not the default at that point. So that started to emerge. Now, that has expanded, and revenue operations was, V1 was just kind of a broadening of scope around sales operations. I think the next step for it, is probably that revenue operations begins to eat into the COO's org, and potentially the COO of tomorrow, a huge part of their function is revenue operations. And that is something that I've started to see emerge, is directors or VPs of biz ops or COOs coming from a revenue operations background, and that being their core discipline, and all the other things that traditionally come with biz ops being the thing that they need to sort of learn and level themselves up on. Because I think, those functions the COO is already owning, in many, maybe not all cases, data and product analytics, IT operations, adding on go-to-market systems and RevOps, which are other, cross-functional centralized disciplines, I think makes a ton of sense. The alternative to that is that the CRO and the head of RevOps roles basically invert. And I could see that happening really because, CRAs are very homogeneous in terms of their backgrounds. Like, they are all sales leaders. So I think not only is there a difficult dynamic with, a CRO who is perhaps a very strategic sales leader, and that is their background, overseeing this very strategic, operationally oriented, analytical heavy discipline in RevOps, that becomes a little bit of a difficult dynamic when RevOps rolls into the CRO. And RevOps itself is already expanding. It used to be you came from a sales ops background and that was it. Now, with PLG and other motions emerging, like, you see marketing backgrounds, you see analytics backgrounds, you see product and finance backgrounds moving into RevOps. And I think it fits very nicely for specific go-to-market motion. So I think we'll start to see more RevOps leaders tailored to the specific go-to-market strategy of the company, which sounds obvious, but you still don't see it a lot these days. And I do think that it'll either, it'll charge into the C-suite either through the current CRA's purview or through the COO's org, and systems and tools will sort of come with it.
Yeah. What's your take on this, Tina?
Before today, I always thought it's going to be like owned by the next generation of CFOs, because now with, more growth and revenue centricity in today's business world, right? I see more and more, ownership on the CFOs, in that they drive more revenue clarity from, starting from go-to-market, from, the growth. But now I really tend to agree that it's because, it sounds like, it's going to be more of a next generation COO and CRO. I think that's, also making a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think in general, it's less, I've had this argument all year with different people. I've talked to CIOs, CROs, and I've seen RevOps report into CFOs, into CROs, and the reality is you need to have 1 foot in finance, 1 foot in sales, and 1 foot in CS, and you got to bridge all of them. It's a high calling. So on that note, thank you so much, both of you, for the time, and more conversations to come on this. This was really fun. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.